Flight attendant slaps a passenger unaware he was her school teacher. The cabin was quiet in that uneasy way it gets right before something goes wrong. Seatbelts were fastened, overhead bins shut, engines humming steadily as the plane cut through the clouds. Most passengers were lost in their own worlds, headphones on, eyes closed, minds elsewhere. No one noticed the tension building in row 14, except the young flight attendant standing in the aisle, her jaw tight, her hands clenched at her sides. She had already warned him twice. "Sir, please remain seated during turbulence." The elderly man slowly lifted his head. His movements were careful, almost fragile. "Miss, I just need my medicine," he said softly, pointing toward the overhead compartment. She sighed sharply. It had been a long shift, delays, rude passengers, a supervisor watching her every move. Her patience was gone. "I told you to sit down," she snapped, loud enough for nearby passengers to turn their heads. "You're putting everyone at risk." The man's hands trembled. "Please, I taught for 40 years. I know rules matter, but I—" Before he could finish, the plane jolted. In a split second of panic, frustration, and fear, she reacted. Her hand struck his face. The sound was sharp, final, unavoidable. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The man stumbled back into his seat, glasses slipping crooked down his nose. For a moment, he looked less like a disobedient passenger and more like someone deeply wounded in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Silence swallowed the aisle. The flight attendant froze, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't meant to hit him. Not really. It was instinct, stress, adrenaline. But the damage was done, and every eye in the cabin was on her now. "I am sorry," she muttered, though her voice carried no confidence. The elderly man touched his cheek slowly, then looked up at her. And that's when his eyes widened. Not in anger, in recognition. "Emily?" he asked quietly. Her name hit her like turbulence she hadn't braced for. She stared at him, confused. "How do you know my name?" He squinted, leaning forward just enough to see her face clearly. His voice shook not with fear, but with emotion. "You sat in the second row, near the window. You always finished your essays early, and waited for others." Her heart skipped. "No, that wasn't possible." "I was your literature teacher," he said gently, "Mr. Harrison." The world tilted. The cabin seemed to fade, the murmurs, the stares, the judgment all dissolving into a single memory she hadn't visited in years. A classroom, dusty sunlight. A kind voice encouraging her to read aloud when she was too shy to raise her hand. Her knees felt weak. "Mr. Harrison?" she whispered. The man nodded slowly. "You grew up." Her face drained of color. The passengers watched as the confident flight attendant, the one who had just slapped a man in front of them, all suddenly looked like a frightened student caught after class. I didn't recognize you," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." "I didn't know." "I know," he replied softly. "Time does that." Tears burned behind her eyes. Around them, whispers grew louder. Phones were raised. Someone shook their head. Someone else muttered, "Unbelievable." The flight attendant stepped back, covering her mouth. The authority she carried moments ago had vanished, replaced by something raw and human. "I used to tell my students," Mr. Harrison continued, "that who they become matters more than what they achieve." He looked at her not accusingly, but sadly. "And today," he added, "you forgot who you were." The words hurt more than any reprimand could. She lowered her head, shame flooding her chest. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, unaware of the emotional wreckage unfolding mid-cabin. But for Emily, the flight had already changed course. And this was only the beginning. The plane continued forward, oblivious to the emotional free-fall inside its cabin. Emily stood frozen in the aisle long after the turbulence subsided. Her training screamed at her to regain control, to call a supervisor, to follow protocol, but none of that mattered now. All she could see was a classroom from 20 years ago, chalk dust floating in the air, and a man who had once believed in her when no one else did. The plane continued forward, oblivious to the emotional free-fall inside its cabin. Emily stood frozen in the aisle long after the turbulence subsided. Her training screamed at her to regain control, to call a supervisor, to follow protocol, but none of that mattered now. All she could see was a classroom from 20 years ago, chalk dust floating in the air, and a man who had once believed in her when no one else did. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses with unsteady fingers. The red mark on his cheek was already darkening, a quiet accusation she couldn't escape. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand justice. That somehow made it worse. "I never imagined we'd meet like this," he said almost to himself. Emily swallowed hard. You used to stay after school with me," she blurted out. "You helped me apply for scholarships. You said I could leave this town one day." A few passengers leaned closer, curiosity overtaking restraint. The story unfolding was far more compelling than any in-flight movie. Mr. Harrison gave a faint smile. "You did leave." "Yes," she whispered, tears finally spilling, "because of you." The weight of that truth crushed her. Her supervisor, Lavar, pushed through the aisle, her expression already stern. "Emily, what's going on here?" she demanded, glancing at the shaken passenger, the murmuring crowd, the phones still recording. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. Mr. Harrison spoke instead. "It was a misunderstanding," he said calmly. "She was doing her job." Emily looked at him in disbelief. Even now, after what she'd done, he was protecting her. Lavra frowned. "Sir, were you struck?" There it was, the official question, the point of no return. Mr. Harrison hesitated. For the first time, his composure cracked. He looked at Emily again, really looked at her trembling hands, her uniform soaked in regret, her eyes begging without words. "Yes," he said finally. "But I don't want this to become something ugly." Emily shook her head violently. "No, it is ugly," she said, voice breaking. "I crossed a line. There's no excuse." The cabin fell quiet. Laura's tone softened, but her words didn't. "Emily, you need to step away from duty, now." Emily nodded numbly and turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Mr. Harrison reached out and gently stopped her. "Emily," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "do you remember the first poem you ever read aloud?" Her breath caught. "It was about forgiveness," she whispered. "You said it takes more courage than pride." He smiled sadly. "Then maybe today is a test for both of us." The plane landed an hour later, but the atmosphere remained heavy. Security was waiting at the gate. So was airline management. So were thousands of opinions already spreading online. Emily sat alone in the jump seat at the back, replaying the moment over and over, the slap, the sound, his face. She knew her career might be over. She accepted that. What she didn't expect was the knock on the cabin divider. Mr. Harrison stood there, coat over his arm, leaning slightly on his cane. "They're asking if I want to file a formal complaint," he said quietly. Her heart pounded. "And?" "I told them I wanted to speak to you first." She stood, barely able to meet his eyes. "Whatever you decide, I'll understand." He studied her the way he once had when grading her essays, not looking for mistakes but for truth. "People aren't defined by their worst moment," he said. "They're defined by what they learn from it." Tears streamed freely now. "I forgot that," she admitted. "I forgot myself," he nodded. "Then remember." As he turned to leave, Emily felt something shift, not relief, not forgiveness yet, but the painful beginning of accountability. Outside the aircraft, consequences waited. But so did a chance to become the person she once promised to be. And the world, watching closely, was about to learn that this story wasn't about a slap at 30,000 feet. It was about what happens after you fall. By the time Emily stepped off the aircraft, the terminal felt less like an airport and more like a courtroom. Phones were raised everywhere. Whispers followed her footsteps like a shadow. Someone had already uploaded the clip. The slap slowed down, zoomed in, replayed again and again without context, without history, without the quiet words that followed. A headline scrolled across a breaking news banner on a nearby screen. "Flight attendant strikes elderly passenger mid-air." Emily's knees nearly buckled. Lavra guided her through a side corridor toward a private office near the gate. "Sit," she said gently, closing the door behind them. "HR is on the way. Security too, just breathe." Emily tried. Every breath felt sharp, incomplete. I ruined everything, she whispered. Lavra hesitated. You made a serious mistake, she said carefully. But what happens next depends on more than just that moment. Emily laughed hollowly. The internet has already decided. Outside the room, raised voices echoed. Someone demanded answers. Someone else demanded accountability. The world wanted a villain, and Emily fit the frame perfectly. Minutes later, 2 airline executives entered, followed by a legal representative. Their expressions were professional, unreadable. Emily Carter, one of them said, folding his hands. You're being placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Emily nodded. She'd expected nothing less. Then the door opened again. Mr. Harrison walked in. The room froze. What is he doing here? The lawyer asked sharply. I requested to speak, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. As the passenger involved, Emily stood instinctively. Sir, you don't have to. I know, he interrupted gently, but I want to. The executives exchanged glances. One gestured for him to sit. I've been asked, Mr. Harrison continued, if I wish to pursue charges or file a formal complaint. Before I answer that, I want you all to understand what actually happened. The lawyer leaned forward. Sir, with respect, the footage is quite clear. Mr. Harrison nodded. So is a single sentence taken out of a book. Silence. He turned to Emily. Do you remember why you panicked? She swallowed. I thought you were having a medical emergency. I'd asked you to sit several times. You didn't respond. When the turbulence hit, my fear took over. And what did I do just before that? He asked. You reached into your coat suddenly, she said. I thought you might fall. Mr. Harrison looked back at the room. I was reaching for my heart medication. I didn't hear her because my hearing aid battery had died. The air shifted. No one saw that in the video, he said quietly. No one heard the words exchanged before or after. They saw one action and decided it was the whole story. One executive cleared his throat. Sir, are you saying you don't wish to file a complaint? Mr. Harrison didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood. I was a teacher for 42 years, he said. I've seen children from broken homes, from violent homes, from no homes at all. I've seen them fail. I've seen them fall. And I've seen what happens when the world only remembers their worst moment. He turned to Emily again. This young woman was one of my students. She came from nothing. She worked harder than anyone I knew. She didn't get here by being cruel. Emily's vision blurred. Yes, he said finally, facing the executives. She struck me, and yes, that is serious. But I do not believe punishment without understanding makes anyone safer. The lawyer frowned. Sir, with respect, company policy. Policies are written by people, Mr. Harrison interrupted. And people are capable of mercy. The room fell quiet again. After a long moment, the senior executive spoke. We will continue our internal review, he said carefully. But your statement will be taken into account. Mr. Harrison nodded once and turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, Emily collapsed into the chair, sobbing openly now. I don't deserve that, she cried. Lavon knelt beside her. Maybe not, she said softly. But maybe you deserve a chance to do better. Outside the airport, the story exploded. Talk shows debated it. Comment sections burned with outrage and defense alike. Some called Emily heartless. Others questioned the airline's training. A few dug deeper, finding old interviews of Mr. Harrison, former students sharing stories of the teacher who changed their lives. One post went viral. That man once bought me my first textbook because I couldn't afford one. Another followed. He stayed late every day until I learned to read. Slowly, the narrative began to crack. Emily didn't see any of it. She spent the night alone in her apartment, uniform folded away, phone turned face down on the table like a ticking bomb. Every sound made her flinch. Every memory replayed itself uninvited. At dawn, her phone buzzed anyway. A message from an unknown number. Mr. Harrison, I hope you slept. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Not as a passenger, as your teacher. She stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Emily, I don't know what to say. The reply came quickly. Mr. Harrison, then just listen. Sometimes that's enough. They met later that day in a quiet park near the airport. Mr. Harrison sat on a bench beneath a tree, feeding crumbs to birds like the world hadn't just torn itself in half. Emily approached slowly as if he might disappear. "I thought you'd hate me," she said. He smiled faintly. "I was disappointed," he corrected. "There's a difference." She nodded, ashamed. "You know," he continued, "people think forgiveness is pretending something didn't happen. It's not. It's choosing what happens next." Emily clenched her fists. "What if I don't get my job back?" "Then you'll find another way to serve," he said simply. "Your worth isn't stitched into a uniform." She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something painful and true. The slap hadn't been the worst thing that happened on that flight. The worst thing was how close she'd come to becoming someone she didn't recognize. And for the first time since it all began, Emily understood that whatever came next, career, consequences, judgment, it wouldn't be the end of her story. It would be the lesson. The investigation stretched on longer than Emily expected. Days turned into a week, then two. Every morning she woke up reaching for a uniform that was no longer there, her body still trained to a schedule that no longer belonged to her. She avoided mirrors because every reflection reminded her of that single frozen frame the internet refused to forget. The airline issued a brief statement. "The matter is under internal review." Nothing more, no reassurance, no timeline. But the world outside didn't wait. Sponsors threatened to pull ads. Morning shows replayed the footage with dramatic music. Commentators dissected Emily's posture, her expression, her tone of voice. They spoke about her as if she were a fictional character, flat, shallow, defined by one action. She stopped checking social media after someone leaked her name and address. What kept her grounded were the quiet moments, short walks at dawn, tea she forgot to drink, and long conversations with Mr. Harrison on a park bench or over the phone. He never lectured, never excused her. He asked questions instead. What were you afraid of in that moment? What did you need that you didn't have? What will you do differently if you're ever that scared again? Those questions hurt more than any headline. One afternoon, he handed her a thin notebook. "I used to give these to students who thought they were finished," he said. "Write in it. Not apologies, not explanations, just truth." Emily filled the first pages with shaking handwriting, fear, pressure, pride, exhaustion, the need to be in control, the terror of failing in front of strangers. She wrote until her wrist ached and her eyes burned, until the chaos inside her began to take shape. Then, on the 19th day, the call finally came. "Emily Carter," the HR director said evenly, "the airline has reached a decision." Emily closed her eyes. "After reviewing all evidence, passenger testimony, and your prior service record, the company has decided not to terminate your employment." Her breath caught painfully in her chest. "However," the director continued, "you will not be returning to active flight duty immediately." Emily swallowed. "I understand. You'll be reassigned to ground operations for 6 months. Mandatory retraining, counseling, a formal warning will remain on your record." "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." "There is one more condition," the director added. "At Mr. Harrison's request." Emily stiffened. "What kind of condition?" "He asked that you participate in a new internal program we're developing, conflict de-escalation training. Based on real scenarios, he's agreed to consult." Emily was silent for a long moment. "I'll do it," she said, "whatever it takes." When the call ended, she didn't cry. She sat very still, hands folded, and let the weight of consequence settle where denial used to live. This wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a bow. This was accountability with a path forward. That night, she went to see Mr. Harrison. "They're giving me another chance," she said softly. He smiled, but there was no triumph in it. "Good, now the harder work begins." The first day back at the airport, she wore a plain badge instead of a uniform. Some coworkers avoided her. Others nodded politely. A few stared openly. She didn't blame them. During training sessions, she spoke last. She listened as colleagues discussed fear responses, authority reflexes, and the psychology of panic at 30,000 feet. When it was her turn, she didn't defend herself. "I thought control meant safety," she said. "I was wrong. Control without compassion is just fear wearing a badge." The room stayed quiet long after she finished. Weeks later, a senior instructor pulled her aside. "You know," he said, "people don't usually learn like this unless they've lost something first." Emily nodded. "I lost who I thought I was." "And?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "I found who I want to be." Outside the training room, a small crowd had gathered near the windows. Emily recognized Mr. Harrison's voice before she saw him. He was speaking to a group of young recruits, his hands animated, eyes bright. "I'm not here because she was perfect," he was saying. "I'm here because she wasn't, and she chose to face it." Emily stood at a distance, not interrupting. One of the recruits asked, "Did you forgive her right away?" Mr. Harrison smiled gently. "No, forgiveness isn't instant. It grows when someone proves they're listening." He glanced toward Emily, catching her eye. "And she has been listening." Months passed. The online outrage faded, replaced by newer scandals, louder mistakes. But something unexpected remained: letters, emails, messages from passengers and crew members who had faced similar moments and didn't know how to talk about them until Emily did. She kept every letter. On the day she was cleared to return to flight duty, Emily stood in the mirror adjusting her uniform with careful hands. It fit the same as before, but she didn't. At the gate, as passengers boarded, an elderly woman hesitated near the aisle, breathing shallowly. Emily approached slowly, crouching to eye level. "May I help you?" she asked softly. The woman nodded, relieved. Emily stayed with her until she was seated comfortably, calling medical support just to be safe. No raised voice, no rushed movements, just presence. As the plane lifted into the sky, Emily took her jump seat and looked out the window. She thought about how easily a life could split into before and after. She thought about how a single moment could expose every crack or become the place where light finally entered. After landing, she checked her phone. A message from Mr. Harrison waited. "Proud of you. Class dismissed." Emily smiled, not because everything was fixed, not because she'd been redeemed in the eyes of strangers, but because she finally understood the lesson her teacher had been trying to teach her all along. You are not defined by the worst thing you've done, but by what you choose to do once you truly see it.